Securities offered through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through CWM, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC is under separate ownership from any other named entity. Carson Partners, a division of CWM, LLC, is a nationwide partnership of advisors. This is The Way to Wealth, with host Scott Ford, a jiu-jitsu fighting, woodworking, beekeeping entrepreneur who is also the managing director, partner, and wealth advisor of Carson Wealth. Financial freedom is the goal, and clarity and simplicity is how we'll get there. Let's get to it. This is Way to Wealth.
Hello, and welcome back to the Way to Wealth podcast, where we're all about making money simple, allowing you to fully live and fully live now, not 30 or 40 years from today. I'm stoked today to share Ari Weinzweig with you on the podcast. I met Ari through a friend, John Anderson, years ago, and actually Vern Harnish introduced me years ago. I was able to hear Ari speak and really resonated with his messaging to the point we had him in to Baltimore to talk to, 25, 30 financial advisors we coached in years gone by, and Ari shared his message. And I think he was wondering, what in the heck am I doing in Baltimore talking to a bunch of wealth advisors? Maybe I think when we met at dinner, it's like there's a lot of synergies from, as you all know, one of my things is permaculture and just creating a sustainable everything. It's a sustainable landscape. How do we create sustainable finances? And then how do you create a sustainable business? Like, that's what I'm up to. Well, this is Ari's world. So excited to have him share, his thoughts on a lot of this. He's a deep thinker. So if you don't know Ari, founded in 1982 with his partner, Paul, Zingerman's, which is now a group of companies. Today, Zingerman's is nationally renowned, which it is, food icon, and a community of businesses has grown to over 10 with over 750 employees and over 55 million in annual revenue. The thing with Ari as well is just a thought leader. I know you're a prolific writer, putting out a lot of content and great content. You're a deep thinker from everything that I've read. And so super excited to have the opportunity to share you with my audience today. Ari, welcome to the Way to Wealth.
Thanks for having me. I only send you the deep thinking ones. I'll leave the really shallow, superficial stuff for the others.
Well, I'm appreciative of that because that's different than what I'm used to reading. So I appreciate the deep thinking.
I try to write meaningful stuff that I think it fits with your approaches. As you said, we both have an affinity for permaculture and Native American indigenous learning and all kinds of other things. So yeah, honored to be here, man.
Thanks, Ari. Looking forward to it. And it's exactly right. There's a lot of synergies here. And one of them is just the laws of nature. Speaking of the indigenous, they knew that. And I think, I've shared this in the past, I don't think with you, but I had mentioned a company we had started last year, Legato Family, and Legato Family is about creating these value systems for families, but it's also about creating rites of passage because look, kind of lost that in today's culture. So getting back to some of this indigenous wisdom. And one of the things that they did as far as indigenous is really understand nature and how we need to work with it, not against it. And that's in all areas of life. And going even deeper, when I started digging into this, we're calling our process 7th generation family constitutions. So taken from the U.S. Constitution. Well, the U.S. Constitution, guess what, was taken from the Iroquois Confederacy and the Great Law of Peace. They just happened to leave out a couple of things, like the role of the feminine and women in government and leadership and the 7th generation thinking. So how is the decision I make today going to affect 7 generations from now? So I'm wanting to bring that back. So we left some of that valuable stuff out. So anyway, it's some of this audience is just us catching up. I haven't talked to Ari in a while, so just doing some sharing and letting you in on the conversation as part of what today will be. So, Ari, let's just start there. What are your thoughts on laws of nature, natural law, and how it attains to personal and business?
Well, I wrote a lot about it. So as you know, there's a whole series of leadership books I've done, which we could talk more about later. But in the first one, there's an essay called 12 Natural Laws of Business. And I actually have 12 more, 11 of which are written and one more to write. But yes, there's natural laws of business. And I don't know that I got them in the right order. And I'm sure other people use different words, but they are like gravity. So I forget who I was talking to reading the other day. He goes, I think it was Seth Godin. He goes like, you don't hear anything about gravity deniers, do you?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. But these are just as true. You can ignore them just like you can ignore gravity. Like I can pretend that this coffee's going to go up and I can throw it in the air and it will go up for a little bit, but it will later come down. So the natural laws of business are like that. They're just true. And to your point, part of what helped me understand that they're true is, although the words that I use obviously are my own words, the themes are universally applied, and I've heard them from people in the military. I've heard it from farmers. I've heard it from basketball players. I've heard it from ministers. I've heard it from parents, and it's the same work, right? So when to your point, when you live in harmony with nature, it's all going to go better. And if you fight nature, you can win for a little while, but in the long run, nature is going to come out ahead. I always have Masanobu Fukuoka's quote, which I'm paraphrasing from the amazing book, One Straw Revolution. But he said, if you throw Mother Nature out the front door, she'll come back in the window with a pitchfork, which we're experiencing right now on the planet.
100%. Yes. Working with instead of against is just like what we get back to. And again, you've done so much work on this. I know I'm preaching to the choir on this. It's just good to hear you share, because again, you've read a lot of works, written and shared a lot of works, and it just resonates with me in a deep way. What would be of the laws if there were one? Is there one primary law as far as natural law that really stands out as far as how it ties to business or how it ties to life?
Well, I think the point is they all do. The first one on the list, which doesn't necessarily mean it's the most important, but it's the first one on the list, and I have a new pamphlet out about it, so it's on my mind, is about vision. So anyone, organizational context or as an individual that's getting to greatness, has a vision of where they're headed, right? And as you know, we do a lot of work here to actually write it down, which I'm a big believer in. And the new pamphlet is all about how the visioning process as we use it here has changed our lives. It's quite different from the typical business school model. But the reality is, whether you write it down or not, everybody that's getting to where they want to go has envisioned that future. And that can be for your business. It can be for what you're working with to help people get to sustainable wealth in the later stages of their life. It could be a second grade teacher. It's Michael Jordan used to say he could see the ball going through the hoop before it left his hand. I think we have dogs, not kids, but anybody with little kids has imagined in their head a healthy, positive relationship with their child when the child is an adult. Like, this is what they imagine. So the visioning process is quite intuitive, it's natural, but society teaches us, like so many things, how to go against nature. And so the visioning process is, I think, huge. If you don't know where you're going, it's very hard to get to where you want to be.
Yeah, I love that, Ari. So first of all, dogs are kids, as you know, so it's all good.
We have five. We have 5 plus 1 at our house right now.
Yeah, we're without one at the moment. He transitioned a little over a year ago. So we're down to a cat and deciding when to add one to our abode.
If you're ready, my significant other, my girlfriend, is a farmer, but she's taken to rescuing dogs. And I'll send you her Instagram, but she has saved this amazing dog who really needs to be in a house with not other dogs and not with the little kids. But he's really incredible. His name's Blue. And she saved him from, he was in the spirit of violating nature. He was chained up outside in Detroit, never allowed in, which if you're in Alabama is probably not bad, but in Detroit in January, she saved him on January 1st. And it's quite a story, because essentially she envisioned, in the context of what we're saying, she did a GoFundMe to raise money for a tiny house as a halfway house for dogs. It's on the back part of our land now, and he's in there. And this is the first time in his life that he's been out of a city where there's actually nature and birds and squirrels, and where he gets love and good food. And it's just, even in 3 weeks that he's been at our house or outside our house, but in his own house, so to speak, you can see the tension slowly leaving his face, and as he starts to acclimate to what it's like to live a healthy life. And that's very aligned, I think, with your work too. So
totally is, man. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing. And I'm, kudos to her. Tell her I said thank you. Well done. Yes, shoot information over.
Yeah, there you go. That's her Instagram.
145 acres here.
That'll be perfect, dude. She'll, no joke, she would drive them to your house to get them to the right family. So,
oh, no kidding. Yeah, send it over, man. That would be.
It's in the chat. It's her Instagram now. So,
thank you. I'll click on it and check it out. On nature, you're talking visioning, like, is the process, and I know we've worked on that actually. So when I did it 2020. So I wrote my 2020 vision with you. It was December 2019, I think, and then it was 2020 vision. So obviously a lot's happened since then. That said, you just said you can use it for business and you can use it for personal. So we talk about creating clarity for the family and clarity for the business. Share, if you would, Ari, what that process looks like, visioning, whether you do it for the family or for the business.
Yeah, and if it's a closely held business, it can be one and the same. So for a lot of people listening, it's not that out of the norm that it might be a couple that owns a business. Maybe they only have 2-3 employees. Maybe it's a small family business. So really, the two are totally intertwined, and I think in practice they're intertwined anyway. But like at the size we're at, it's not appropriate for me to write about my relationship with Tammy and the company vision. But my vision with her needs to be congruous with my vision for the business. So if you, I've seen people talk about this, they don't do it in writing because the writing triggers the realization that it's not going to work. But in their head, they're like, yeah, man, I'm going to spend all this time with my little kids while they're growing up, and I'm going to, we're going to travel 3-4 months a year. And then the business vision, in their head, they're going to grow 45% a year. And I'm like, dude, either one of those is awesome, but you're not going to grow 45% a year and add 30 employees a year for the next 5 years while being at every kid's soccer game. It's just not going to happen. And I'm not down on one or the other. It's just understanding that they're not congruous. So like for me, I'm trying to work more. Like I'm running out of years, not in a bad way, but the clock is gently ticking, and I have lots to do and lots to learn and read and write, and I'm excited about it. And I like going to work, and I live with a farmer, and we're both introverts. So she's not like, why aren't you home at 5 o'clock? Right. And so it works really well for us, but for somebody else who expected their significant other to be home every weekend and having dinner at 5:30, it would be a nightmare. And it's not that one way is bad and one way is good. It's just trying to have alignment around what you're trying to create in a way that both people in the relationship can do well. And then in a work level, it's having a vision that everybody involved can do well, right? So how will, the people who come to work here next week, how are they going to be feeling good because of Zingerman's 2032 vision?
It makes complete sense. And that's what we see, right? That's the point of creating the family, the personal and the family, and then the business. And then when we get to the money, let's make sure when we're voting with our dollars, it matches the best we can anyway to those things. And it's just, you see incongruency. And I've lived it many times, incongruency in the family versus business and where the money was voting. So it's like just being thoughtful. So I love the thought of visioning as the family into the business, because to your point, it may not be congruent. Well, then let's just be honest with ourselves. Like, what's it going to be? So it's a great thought process and exercise.
And you deal with this with wealth too. I mean, it's not like there's a right amount of money and a wrong amount of money. I mean, it's just trying to match up, like I don't have an aspiration to have a super yacht, but if you do, and you're not a Russian oligarch, you want one, like you have to make a lot more money than I make. I'm not trying to have one, so I'm good. I'm not trying to, have 7 houses around the world. It's not a judgment of people who want to do that. It just requires a different level of income. And I wrote in this spirit of this too. I've been doing a lot of work around a metaphor for organizational ecosystems. It's a long conversation, but the soil metaphorically is like the culture of the organization. And I wrote a piece a couple months ago in the e-news that I do, which if you don't get that, I need to get you on the list, but I'll get you on there. But I started to look at money as minerals, because you need them in the soil. Soil without minerals will not grow, but too much minerals is not good either. And if you extract all the minerals, you kill the ecosystem. Inequity in the soil, like if you take all the minerals and move them to one end, you're going to kill the rest of the soil. And by the way, gold, just saying, has no value in the soil. So it's ironic that the thing that essentially has the highest value has no value. So the minerals are important, but they're not the point. And when you get into strip mining, it's about removing the minerals at the expense of the ecosystem. And you and I, of course, are highly aligned that that's unhelpful and unhealthy. But so I think the mindset of money as the minerals makes sense to me, because I want some in the soil. We need them in balance in order to help the plants grow properly. But again, excessive minerals or deficient minerals both will lead to ill health.
That's a really interesting thought. I'm not on that, Ari, so would love to get it, because that
Okay.
writing really, that thought process really resonates with me. It made me think of something. It's like, and I heard about this in just reading some of the work of the Vedas, of just talking about how it was important that when you did a fire, whether it was an offering, whatever it was, the ashes of that fire were put back into the soil.
Totally.
Well, why? Because you're remineralizing and it's using it. Why are they doing that? Because they're thinking generations into the future.
Yeah.
And that's that reciprocal nature. So I love that thought of minerals relating to money in the soil. That's a great thought.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, this is another conversation for future, but we're very close to finishing work around a perpetual trust as our succession planning. So this is really about, it's not per se ashes, hopefully it's not ashes, but it's about essentially making an old growth forest that'll still be healthy long after Paul and I are gone, as opposed to what has been the norm. I'm not saying for you or your clients, but has been the norm of the business world in the 20th century, which is essentially clear cutting. So the point of the forest was to make money for the forester. That's the modern version of it. The old forest methodology was you made the forest because you wanted to have forest. And I wouldn't have known this growing up in Chicago, but I've, like you've been studying it. Suzanne Simard's book is awesome. And Wendell Berry's written quite a bit. And I realized the obvious from reading Wendell Berry years ago. And he said, no, logging was an artisan job, right? Well, I didn't know that. I'm a city kid, right? So, and he said that what totally makes sense. In the old days, the forester went in to take the worst trees out, leave the healthiest in order to make the forest healthier.
Worst first.
Right. And so, and then, the idea of creating Zingerman's as an old growth forest that 50 years from now, Paul and I are pretty surely going to be long gone, but that we have continued to make this amazing thing where the benefit of it goes to the people working in the business, not to, no offense, but somebody who bought it from Dubai or Dubuque, Iowa, somebody who's living it, this is people then are benefiting that are essentially living in the community and working in the business. So
I love that. There's so much more for us to talk about on so many.
Yeah. Well, we can have more. There's no limit on how many conversations we can have.
Well, it's true. And that being one of them, so we did that for the family is just a perpetual trust of, what we wanted to be thoughtful of is not create entitlement, but create opportunities. And so creating a perpetual trust for sure. From the family perspective, we've done that. And then how can that be sustaining where you're helping, because we're thinking 7 generations. Well, same thing with the business of what you're saying. I love that thought of a perpetual trust for the business. And it makes me think we have a forester we work with here, and he's old school. He uses oxen. He has 2 oxen that he takes the timber out with, and he's very selective. He's taking worst first, to your point. And basically, there's so many reasons behind it, but I mean, what comes to mind? Well, obviously the worst first. Then he talks about, he says, the way I look at it, Scott, is we're taking select trees per year, worst first. And he said, I look at it as about 4% of what we can take. And I'm like, this is amazing, because this is like the investment world. Like, you're taking the dividend, and that it can still self-sustain. You're not overly over consuming. Take what you need, don't take too much, where it can self-sustain. And I'm like, that applies to the investment world, right? You can set it up in such a way that you take what you need, but not too much. You want it to be able to self-sustain. Hot pinning, and we don't have to go too deep here, but I know hot pinning is part of the process on personal family. So if someone's listening, I'm like, this makes sense, I want to do some visioning. Where do I start? First thing that comes to mind to me is hot pinning.
Yeah. Well, again, the new pamphlet is the story of visioning. So it's really looking at our history at Zingerman's over 40 years and how the visioning process changed our lives, and how, without question, as I said in the pamphlet more than once, I wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation with you, because the vision as we do it is an inside out exercise. It is not the 5-line business school with respect to those who teach it. It's not the 4 or 5 line business school vision statement in quotes. This is a story. And the first line of the proper part of the pamphlet is, this is a story about stories. So it's basically, the vision is writing your own story before it happens. So it's getting clear on where you want to go. And it's a story, not a 3-line, 4-line statement, like I said. So it talks about how you feel. It talks about how others feel about you. It talks about how you feel about your work. It talks about the parts of your work that really matter. And if some stuff doesn't matter, then don't talk about it. But if it's a personal vision, it might, like for me, it would include the kind of food I eat, the kind of music I'm listening to, the kind of books I read. For other people who don't like to read, my books might not even show up. It's all okay. And for the business, it can be not our vision, but somebody's vision could be that they want to have 6,000 units all over the country. Ours is that we only open here in the Ann Arbor area, that we only do each business once. Our vision for 2032 talks about succession planning and doing it well. So we're describing a story of how it looks after we've done it well, et cetera, et cetera. So the hot pen is a technique that allows you or me, and we didn't make it up. I learned it from Stash Kazmierski, and I just wrote a piece in April. I honestly can't find, he passed away 5.5 years ago, which is very sad for us. And I don't know who he learned it from, and no one that he worked with. And there's a lot of people seems to know. So I'm going to just say he made it up, but it's essentially free writing. I'm a history major, not an English major, so I wouldn't have known that. But if anybody's listening that was an English major, they'll know what free writing is. So this is a methodology of just sitting down and putting your brain into the future at a particular point in time that you choose. We wrote this organizational vision for 2032. It's been out for a year and change. We picked 2032 because it'll put us at 50 years in business, but you could do 3 years, 5 years, whatever you want. And then you start writing. And the hot pen is that you just keep writing and you don't stop. And if you were to come to a 2-day Zing Train, which is our training business, come to a 2-day Zing Train seminar on visioning. To do this, we would probably have you writing for about 40, 45 minutes, which sounds like a long time, but the beauty of this is you need to keep writing the entire time. And if you do keep writing, the really good stuff starts coming out. Most of us have one of the natural laws of business, not the first one I gave you, but one of them is that our strengths lead to our weaknesses. They're interconnected. So just speaking of nature, I live in Ann Arbor, so Michigan is not known for the best weather in the country. But here's the good news. I learned last year, we have the lowest statistical odds of a natural disaster in the whole country of every state. So conversely, you could go live in San Francisco, but you might be in a chasm in the ground or in a fire. So
This is
point is just what we're good at leads to what we're not good at. Everybody listening to this, you and me included, is smart. and we can all overthink everything.
Yep.
Right. The more books we read, the more podcasts we listen to, and I do a lot of both, like you do.
Me too.
The easier it is to overthink because there's 60
Yep.
million opinions about what you should do. So the hot pen process, by writing continuously, short circuits that conscious intervention, and it allows us to tap what's already in our hearts that our conscious thinking is telling us can't happen. Right.
I love
So
that.
this, by putting yourself into the future, and part of the work is to disengage from what we call the how, right? That's the planning.
Yep.
That comes later. This is what success looks like. So I'm sure you teach this with wealth management. It's like, and I've told, by the way, teaching this to wealth managers, I've done many times, not all of them buy, so to speak, but I'm like, this is what you need to do with your client, because I'm not trying to leave a giant inheritance. I want to leave something to Tammy, but like you, I want to, right? So the perpetual trust is an awesome solution. But if you have somebody who's trying to leave $20 million to each of their 5 children, the perpetual trust is a terrible solution, unless you already have the $100 million. So this is really getting clear on what success looks like, feels like, tastes like, sounds like for you. So then you can plan accordingly.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I've done the exercise many times now and totally resonate with. By the way, see if you can see this. If I can get this to zoom in. I don't know if you can recognize those books there behind the rabbit.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So anyway, they're on the shelf. My wife helped me set it up. She obviously liked the texture, the view of the book. So I've read your stuff, and really, really good stuff. I know you've written information on humility. I wanted to talk about this and, get your thoughts on humility, because I think that's part of, well, I'm going to back up just for a second, because one of the things you had talked about is, we can end up with information overload. And so a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs clearly listen to this podcast. It's who I am. And we can, and yet you said this, we already know the answer's in there. And so I really haven't heard you say, or I don't remember you saying that hot pinning helps get to the answers we already know. That's it, because it is true. It's already in there. Get to our own knowing, and hot pinning being able to facilitate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the reality. You could write a draft vision the first time through that gets at what you really want, and then you might make a conscious choice not to do it because the compromises that it entails are not aligned with other priorities, but it's a conscious choice.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's very different than what happens to most people, which is that they're alternately angry at themselves, angry at their spouse, angry at their business partner, angry at the president, angry at the economy, whatever that is, blaming 100 other things, and then they're back to mad at themselves. If you freely choose to pursue something, like if you want to be a professional poet, you're probably not going to be a professional basketball player at the same time. I think they're both awesome. but if you're 18 and you're putting 40, 50, 80 hours a week into poetry, you're not going to be in the NBA. Now, that said, if you wrote a 25-year vision, there's room for both, because you won't be in the NBA for 25 years probably. So So there's room for both if you go far enough out and you can create something. But this allows us to essentially, the vision defines what we're going to do. It does come from the heart, but it also in the process helps clarify what we're not going to do. But it's a choice made from the heart, from our passions, from our dream, from our soul, whatever you want to say, in a way that feels right, not in a way that's like I'm making my mother happy, or I'm doing what my advisor told me to do, but I didn't really want to do, or I don't really like this, but I read 3 articles that told me I should, so I'm going to grudgingly go. It's a hard way to live. And in the ecosystem metaphor, I compared the soul to the moon. I'm not religious, but in the spirit of what you're talking about with native wisdom, I mean, because it pulls you quietly towards it, it has a very significant impact, but it never gets the headlines. So back to humility, which we'll come back to. So the moon is essentially what we're talking about. John O'Donohue, who's an amazing writer, Irish writer, said, your soul always knows what your vision really is. And this is writing a vision that's aligned with your soul. And in the spirit of nature, and the ecosystem, I started to look at all these pieces, right? But the vision is the one thing you and I build as humans. So we need to build it in the spirit of permaculture. We need to build it in alignment with the ecosystem, right? So if we do Zingerman's well, and we're trying imperfectly, it's designed in a way that fits the ecosystem of Ann Arbor. The natural laws are applicable in Alaska, Armenia, it doesn't matter where you go, but the adaptation of them needs to be local. Conversely, if you have all franchises, and again, I'm not judging people, but as Wendell Berry says, it's like putting a cookie cutter down on dough. So that, whatever, the Best Buy, the McDonald's, whatever it might be, again, it's not a judgment, but it's the same, whether it's in, Mississippi, Montana, it doesn't look any different. And that's part of what they do, right? That's their strength. It leads to the weakness, which is the lack of local identity. So the vision is what we create in the ecosystem. It needs to be true to who we are as designers, as artists, as architects, but then it also needs to fit with the ecosystem that you're in.
Totally. And so back to nature, think of an apple tree. An apple tree doesn't try to be anything else than an apple tree. And it's really easy for us as human beings on this planet to get caught up in someone else's priorities, objectives, goals, and we don't even realize it. Again, whether it's family, whether it's a colleague, whether it's parents, whatever. And so just be you, like, what do you really want? So I think visioning, viewing it from that lens is really important. And it's a natural law. It's what nature does. It doesn't try to be anything that it's not. The other thing that I thought about is, like, if there were one thing that I would say from nature, long-term, like nature's long-term, it's thinking way out. So to do that in business, like you said, a 25-year vision, 7th-generation thinking, which goes back to indigenous wisdom. I think that's just a super healthy way to live life, both personally and in business. So humility. I know you have written some things about humility. I wanted to share that, a piece on that as well, Ari.
Yeah, so I had a pamphlet come out during the pandemic on humility. It's not a subject I would ever have really thought about much, not for better or for worse. It just wasn't really in my mind. And the only reason I ended up getting into it is I got asked to speak at a symposium on humility. And I'm like, I don't know anything about humility. And I would have said no in a minute, except the woman who asked used to work for us and she's awesome. And her husband still works for us and he's awesome. And I didn't have the heart to say no. So I said yes. And then I started trying to, do what I need to do homework to get ready for the talk. And so that interaction manifested over time into this pamphlet. And so it's just an attempt to share what I learned. It's in the natural laws now for the next set. It's not in the first 12. I started to look at it in the ecosystem metaphor as topsoil. In fact, it's easy because humility and humus are from the same root. Without topsoil, nothing really grows well. As you know, and I don't remember the stats, but the erosion of topsoil on the planet is catastrophic. I'm going to suggest that the corollary is the erosion of humility in the human ecosystem, and it is also catastrophic. A good friend of mine who deals in bigger circles of influence than I do asked me last fall if she should give some advice to people of both political parties from business. What would it be? And I wrote a piece about humility to send her because, we can argue about tax rates and whatever, like, I don't even care. But in a sense, if there were more humility, it gets rid of almost all of the problems, because it's a lack of humility that leads Putin to invade Ukraine. It's a lack of humility that leads to racism, because humility means none of us are better and none of us are worse. It's lack of humility that leads to the climate crisis because we don't treat the planet with dignity. It's a lack of humility that leads people to make decisions quickly without consulting with those who know more than they do, because they can and because they're right, in quotes, without talking to people who are way wiser than they are. And yes, in the end, somebody has to make a decision. And yes, in the end, no one will be fully happy, but there's ways to make those decisions that are, instead of being egotistical and proving your power, one can have a collaborative, caring conversation that extends over a long period of time that helps find creative solutions and where everybody can come out pretty much ahead, right? And anyway, so humility, as I said in the humility pamphlet, it doesn't get the headlines. In fact, it's the antithesis of headlines. And I actually am probably going to write about it for next week's e-news again, just because it's in my mind, and because I'm going to be speaking on it at a conference in Portland week after next. And I realized, like, if you go through the news, there's almost nothing about humility. There's no, like, when's the last time you read a lead article that said how great the leader was because they actually, they thought about it and they realized they really weren't sure, and they're gathering opinions from some other experts, and they want to take some time in the woods to think about it a little bit and really get grounded in this subject matter. Like, if they said that, they would be humiliated by people who want them to be strong, decisive leaders, which I'm just going to say is a great mythology, but it's not helpful. And so there's a lot of, as you know, that blue book that's up on the corner of the shelf behind you is all about beliefs. And there's a commonly held belief in American society that the strong leader knows the answers. There's the commonly held belief in these genius visionary leaders. And it leads to this, that people don't know, they don't know what to do, but they have the belief they need to act like they know what to do.
It makes me think, I'm certainly no English major or scholar, but I think that the word humility, what came in as you were sharing that, is human. What is the
Correct.
root of humility? Well,
that
one
is,
thing
that's what I was going to get to. Yes.
Oh, sorry. I had no,
No, you're great. Go, man.
Because if that's the root, then reality recognizing that what is the essence? Well, man, that's what we are.
Right.
Guess what? That means we are in essence
Correct.
the same outside of skin color, and all the other religion, all of the other stuff is stuff.
Oh, yeah.
What's the core? And if you get to that is humility. Oh, we are one and the same. Let's figure out how to cooperate, collaborate, and like nature, for the good of all. It's reciprocal.
Yeah. And this is just the reality of what I've come to understand is we're at our most human when we're in a state of humility. And then also I realized in working on the pamphlet, I started to shift the language for myself, because I just, never having paid much attention to humility, I would have thought, like, you're whatever, Scott's humble, this guy's not humble, this woman's not. But it's really, I've started to look at it more like mindfulness. It's a state that none of us attain as stasis. Like, we're all shifting in and out of mindfulness. And even if you really work at it, no one's mindful all the time. In the same way that humbleness gives me that mental model. So no one's humble all the time. Like, I got an ego too. I have low self-image sometimes too, right? And, lots of therapy and working at it and journaling and whatever helps me be less likely to, dive into being down on myself or whatever. But humbleness means, in my mind, like, we're all struggling with this. And yes, for an hour or a day or 5 minutes, we hit it pretty good, but then we're too far one way or the other. So for me, that was quite helpful also.
And the beauty of what you just said, Ari, is that's exactly what nature does. I mean, you get the argument of there's no such thing as balance. Well, I'm not going to argue with that. What I will say is that's what we strive towards
Right.
recognizing we're out
Yes.
of balance in this area. Guess what nature does? Oh, we went too far with this. So what's it doing? It's constantly coming back into balance because it's naturally course correcting. And that's exactly the illustration. Oh, yeah, little out of balance here with the humility piece. So let's just kind of see it and then come back in. And you're going to go too far in another way. That's the dance in my mind. So that's what it feels like for me. So this is amazing. So much wisdom that I've learned just chatting with you and catching up. Ari, I'd love to do this again. If you're open to it, your books, what would people wanting to learn more about any of your works? What's the best way to get intel?
My email is ari@zingermans.com. You can put it in the show notes. People are welcome to email me. In the spirit of what we've been talking about, the books we're kind of off the grid. We're basically the farm to table version of books. I didn't like the big publishing world for all the reasons that we talked about. And so we do all the design here. We produce them here. We print them here in town. We're off of Amazon, which with all due respect, is not congruous with our values and the way we want to live and work. So we're not on there. And I understand that's inconvenient for some people, but we have them on our website, zingermanspress.com, and also zingtrain.com, our training business. And then if anybody that's listening actually has a cool small business that wants to sell them, we'd be honored to wholesale them too. So like we got a wine shop in New York that's going to start selling them soon. We got a art gallery in New Orleans that sells them, and, just trying to find cool places that want a product that's not, in every other shop for $2.99, that is made on nice paper and done in a caring way. So the books are there, and then the e-news, I'll send you. Well, I've sent you the links in the chat here to a couple of them, but I'll sign you up personally, and then it's free. People can either go to zingermanscommunity.com and sign up, or they can email me and I'll sign them up. So that's all good. And then, of course, zingtrain.com, we teach a lot of this stuff, or almost all this stuff, in our training seminars. And last but definitely not least, if they want to eat our food, which is the bulk of what we do, zingermans.com is great too.
Beautiful. Thank you, Ari. We'll run this back, do it again. So much wisdom. I'm grateful. I know the audience, if you're listening, are appreciative with your sharing, and we'll talk more about your books. And I love what you're doing and how you're handling like that. That's been my message for a while, making the money clear on who we are. And there's no judgment. You pick who that is. Your business, no judgment there. You be that. And then let's vote with our dollars. And you're doing it, man. You're not. So it's really real easy to be on the Amazon train. That's not matching who you have written that you are, who your business is, and you're voting with your dollars. I know you're not perfect at it, but what a great stance.
No one is.
No, that's it.
I drove my car to get here.
That's the balance, right? That's the just recognizing and getting back in. So thanks being here, Ari. We'll do it again. And audience, thanks for joining Way to Wealth podcast. We'll catch you back here next week. Thanks for listening in. Later.
The opinions voiced in Way to Wealth with Scott Ford, Managing Director, Partner, and Wealth Advisor of Carson Wealth, are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. No strategy assures success or protects against loss. To determine what may be appropriate for you, consult with your attorney, accountant, financial or tax advisor prior to investing. Guests on Way to Wealth are not affiliated with CWM LLC or Cetera Advisor Networks LLC. Legato family is not affiliated with Cetera Advisor Networks LLC or CWM LLC. Carson Wealth, 19833 Leitersburg Pike, Suite 1, Hagerstown, Maryland, 21742.